The Gilded Cage. The Architecture of Surrender. A Hood Eloquence original. Where the streets meet the literature. They say control is an illusion. But those people have never met a man who knows exactly how to build a cage you want to live in. Naomi Branch, private journal, undated. The most dangerous thing a powerful woman can do is finally trust someone with her stillness. Elias Dean, personal correspondence, never sent. Part 1, the blueprint. Every structure begins with a vision. The question is never whether it will stand. The question is always, who will live inside it? Chapter 1. The woman who closed deals. Naomi Branch did not sweat. Not in boardrooms, not in courtrooms, not on the 23rd floor of her own building when the air conditioning shuttered and died at 2:15 in the afternoon on the hottest Thursday in Atlanta's recorded history. She simply adjusted the lay of her blazer, smoothed a single invisible wrinkle from her slate gray lapel, and continued dismantling the man seated across from her as if the temperature were a minor inconvenience he had arranged himself. The man's name was William Hicks, billed to his colleagues, that stubborn son of a bitch, to everyone else, and he had been sitting in her conference room for the better part of 3 hours attempting to convince her that the Peachtree Corridor development rights were, in fact, not hers to claim. He was wrong. She had the documentation to prove it. She had the patience to let him believe otherwise for precisely as long as it served her. Ms. Branch, with all due respect, Hicks Harrison Properties has held option on this parcel since before you were running deals in this city. She let the silence work for her. Silence was her oldest tool. She had learned it not in any law school or negotiation seminar, but from watching her grandmother, Jackie Branch, a woman who had said less in 82 years than most people said in a Tuesday, sit across from anyone who underestimated her and simply wait for them to fill the quiet with their own undoing. Naomi was her grandmother's daughter in this way. Your option expired on March 3rd. You refiled on March 9th. There were 6 days in between, Mr. Hicks. I moved on day 4. She slid the folder across the glass table without looking at it. She looked at him. Just at him. The way you look at something you have already decided to keep. He looked at the folder. His attorney looked at the folder. His attorney's jaw adjusted itself slightly toward the floor. This is a technicality. It is a deed. She stood. Not abruptly, she never did anything abruptly. Rising was a performance, and Naomi had learned early that how you left a room told people everything about whether you would return victorious. My office will have the revised acquisition proposal to your team by end of business. Mr. Hicks, Mr. Harrison, gentlemen. She walked out into the corridor, and it was only in the privacy of the elevator, only when the mirrored doors slid shut and showed her own face back to herself, that she pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose and exhaled for the first time since morning. She was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixed. The kind that lived in attendance. In the place just behind the eyes. She was 38 years old, and she had built Branch Development Group from a 2-room office on Cascade Road to a $40 million firm with 11 employees and her name on the side of 3 buildings. And some mornings she woke up and felt the full architecture of that accomplishment sitting on her chest like something she had agreed to carry without reading the fine print. The elevator opened onto the lobby. Marcus, her driver, was already there. Hard one. They're all hard ones, Marcus. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Dean called again. Says the Whitmore Gallery opening is moved to Friday. Private. 8 o'clock. She paused at the revolving door, one hand on the warm brass. Tell him I'll think about it. I always do, Miss Branch. He always says he already knows you'll come. She did not respond to that. She walked through the door into the Atlanta heat, and the city received her like it always did, loudly, without apology, expecting everything. She had met Elias Dean 9 months ago at a planning commission dinner she had not wanted to attend. He was not the most prominent man in the room. He was, in fact, almost deliberately unremarkable in his bearing, dressed in a dark suit with no tie, standing alone near a window with a glass of something amber in his hand, watching the room the way architects always watched rooms, as though he was quietly calculating what he would have done differently. She had been placed at his table by the event coordinator's alphabetical misfortune. Branch. Dean. Adjacent. The first 45 minutes, he said almost nothing. He listened. And there was something in the quality of his listening, the way it was complete, the way it had weight, that made her notice him the way she noticed load-bearing walls. When he finally spoke, he did not introduce himself or offer credentials. He simply said, "You hold yourself like someone who hasn't been still in a very long time." She had looked at him directly then. It was the kind of observation that should have felt presumptuous coming from a stranger. From him it landed somewhere between diagnosis and invitation. "And you hold yourself like someone who spends a lot of time studying things that aren't his business." He smiled. Not widely, it was the kind of smile that knew its own proportions. "Architect. Everything that stands is my business." She had given him her card at the end of the evening. She had told herself it was professional curiosity. She was, after all, in the business of buildings. That had been 9 months ago. In those 9 months, Elias Dean had done something no one else in her orbit had managed. He had learned the geography of her edges without ever once trying to flatten them. Chapter 2. What an architect knows. Elias Dean drew in pencil, always. Not because he distrusted technology, he was fluent in every software his firm used, but because pencil required commitment. You had to press the lead to the page and mean it. Ink could be crossed out. Pencil could be erased, yes, but the ghost of it remained. The indent in the paper. The suggestion of a previous intention. He believed in the ghost of intentions. His firm, Dean and Associates Architecture, with offices on Peachtree Street, was mid-sized by design, not by circumstance. He had declined 3 buyout offers in the past 6 years. He liked knowing every project that bore his name. He liked the intimacy of that accountability. His associate, Paula Ford, appeared in the doorway of his studio at 4:15 on a Thursday with the expression she reserved for conversations she suspected he did not want to have. The Whitmore Gallery called to confirm Friday. And before you say anything, yes, I already told them you'd be there. I hadn't decided yet. You'd decided. You just hadn't said it out loud. He set down his pencil. Paula had been with him for 7 years. She knew the architecture of him almost as well as he did. Is Naomi coming? Marcus called. She said she'd think about it. She's coming. Paula made the face she made when she was not going to press further, a small compression of the lips, a slight angle of the head that communicated noted without commentary, and disappeared back into the hallway. Elias turned back to the drafting table. He was working on a residential commission in Buckhead, a home for a surgeon named Thomas Davis who wanted, in his own words, a place where nothing needs deciding when I walk through the door. Elias understood that request intimately. He was building it into every corner, the way the light fell without switches needing to be adjusted, the way the kitchen was designed so that the most used things were closest to hand, the way the master bath had no mirrors facing the toilet because even powerful men deserved a room where they were not observed. He thought about Naomi when he designed rooms for people who carried weight professionally. He thought about what it would mean to build her a room. Not that she had asked. She had not asked for anything from him except the truth, and he had been careful with that, had offered it in pieces, in proportion to what she seemed ready to hold. That was a kind of architecture too. The scaffolding of trust. The slow reveal of a load-bearing structure beneath what looked like open space. He understood Naomi Branch the way he understood complex structures, through what she didn't say. Through where the stress concentrated. Through the places where the facade was perfectly maintained and therefore most likely to be compensating for something. She was brilliant. She was controlled. She was, beneath all of it, exhausted in a way she had probably not admitted to a single person on this earth. He had seen it at the commission dinner. He saw it every time they sat across from each other, which was not often enough and always too deliberately arranged. He saw it in the way she laughed, fully, genuinely, and then seemed to briefly startle at the sound of it, as though laughter was a system override she hadn't authorized. He had been patient. Patience was, for him, a form of precision. You did not rush a structure. You did not ask the foundation to receive weight it had not been prepared to hold. But Friday was coming, and the gallery was ready, and he had spent 6 weeks on the piece in its center, and he believed, with the quiet certainty of a man who had learned to read material stress, that Naomi Branch was ready to be asked a question she had not yet learned to answer. Chapter 3. The weight of her calendar. Thursday night, Naomi sat on the edge of her bathtub and did not move for 11 minutes. She knew it was 11 minutes because the clock on the vanity was visible from the angle she had assumed, knees together, feet flat, hands loose in her lap, and she had watched it without intending to. She was still in her blazer. She had gotten as far as the bathroom and then simply stopped. This was not a crisis. She needed to be clear about that with herself. This was fatigue. Ordinary, professional fatigue, the kind that attended high-functioning women in high-demand industries as regularly and reliably as quarterly reports. Her phone was on the counter. She could see the notifications stacking up, her assistant Rachel's summary email, a message from her attorney John Davis about the Hicks counterproposal, a text from her friend Joe Williams asking about Saturday brunch. All of it waiting. All of it hers to answer. She thought about Elias. This was the thing about him that she had not fully admitted, even privately. He was the one place in her life where she did not know what was being asked of her. With everyone else, she knew the ledger. She knew what was expected, what she owed, what would be required. Elias somehow existed outside that accounting, and the combination of that fact and the way he looked at her, with the calm, attentive interest of someone who had all the time in the world and had chosen to spend it looking at her, was something she could not quite file under any category she had. She picked up the phone and texted Marcus. Tell him yes. Friday. 8 o'clock. She put the phone back down and finally took off the blazer. In the mirror, without the armor of it, she was just a woman in a silk blouse with shoulders that hadn't fully dropped in years. She looked at herself the way she almost never did, not evaluating, not preparing, just looking, and wondered, quietly and without pressure, what it would feel like to be in a room where not one single thing was hers to decide. She did not have an answer for that. Not yet. Friday arrived the way Fridays in Atlanta always did in summer, sudden and golden and full of the particular electricity of people who had spent 5 days being disciplined and were preparing to stop. Naomi spent the day in back-to-back meetings, approved 2 site surveys, signed off on a zoning variance application for the Midtown project, and left the office at 6:30 feeling, as she often did on Fridays, like a machine that had just completed its scheduled cycle and was awaiting new instructions. She dressed carefully, which she also did always, but this time the care had a different quality to it. She was not dressing to project. She was dressing for herself. The distinction was real, even if it was subtle. The dress was deep rust, almost copper, with a neckline that suggested without announcing. She chose jewelry that her motherly branch had left her, a necklace of hammered copper discs that caught light in a way that seemed to hold it rather than reflect it. Her friend Joe had called while she was getting ready. "Where are you going tonight?" "You've got the voice." "What voice?" "The voice you get when you're doing something you're not fully going to tell me about." "I'm going to a gallery opening." I'm going to a gallery opening, Joe." A beat of knowing silence. Elias Dean's gallery opening. "Good night, Joe. Call me tomorrow. Every detail." Naomi. She had already hung up. In the car, Marcus did not say anything, which was its own kind of grace. He drove through the Friday evening city, the lights coming on along Peachtree, the restaurants filling, the sidewalks softening from the day's formality, and Naomi watched it all through the window and felt, beneath the industry of her usual thinking, something she could only describe as a hum. Low and constant and not unwelcome. The Whitmore Gallery was dark from the outside. No marquee, no signage for the evening. Only the address and a single warm light through the glass of the front door, and Elias standing just inside it, watching for her the way he always watched, fully and without pretense. Part 2, the foundation. You cannot build on soft ground. The work of an architect is first to understand what the earth will and will not hold, and then to design accordingly. Chapter 4. The gallery. He opened the door before she reached it. Of course he did. He had that quality, the quality of a man who was never caught off guard because he had already accounted for the relevant variables. "You're exactly on time." "I'm always exactly on time." "I know. It's one of the things about you that I find genuinely moving." She stepped inside and he closed the door behind her and the city disappeared. Not literally, she could still see it through the gallery's tall windows, but the sound of it was gone, and the temperature was a controlled cool, and the air carried something, cedar and something darker, warmer, that she would later decide was him. The gallery was a single large room. Exposed brick, pine floors, track lighting turned low. He had taken everything off the walls. Whatever usually hung there, she had been to the Whitmore twice before for client events, was gone. The pedestals were empty. The side rooms were dark. In the center of the room, under a single overhead light aimed with surgical precision, was a chair. She stopped walking. The chair was extraordinary. She understood immediately that it was handmade. She had spent enough time around materials and craft to read the hours in an object. The wood was dark walnut, sanded to a surface that seemed to absorb the light rather than repel it. The form was minimal, clean lines, nothing decorative or gratuitous, every curve load-tested and purposeful. The back was straight. The seat was gently contoured. At the wrists and ankles, fitted into the wood so that they looked structural rather than additional, were restraints of deep cognac leather, buttersoft, fastened with small brass hardware. She looked at the chair for a long moment. She looked at Elias. "You built this." "Yes. It's a piece of art. It's a chair. Whether it becomes art depends on what happens in it." The thing about Elias, the thing she had been unwilling to say directly to herself until this moment, was that he never performed authority. He didn't need to. He simply occupied space with a quality of intention so complete that everyone around him instinctively recalibrated, the way you recalibrated when you walked into a perfectly proportioned room and felt your own breathing change without knowing why. "You called this a gallery opening." "It is. You're the only guest. The piece is for you. A chair with leather restraints is a piece you made for me. An invitation I built for you. The piece doesn't function without a participant. As it stands now, it's just very beautiful furniture." She walked around it. Slowly. Clockwise, then counter. He did not move from his position near the wall, near the door. He gave her the room, gave her the silence, gave her the full, unrestricted access of her own deliberation. This, too, was a form of architecture. The leather was warm-toned against the walnut. The brass fittings were small and unpretentious. The whole structure was less than 3 feet tall, not imposing, not theatrical. It was, she realized, almost tender in its craftsmanship. The kind of thing a person built for another person they had studied carefully and thought about with love. "What are you asking me, Elias?" "I'm asking if you can handle the weight of having no responsibility at all." The question entered her somewhere below language. She had been asked many questions in her professional life. Questions that required strategy. Questions that required calculation. Questions that required her to be the most prepared person in the room. She had never once been asked something that required her to simply know herself. "That's a very big ask." "I know. That's why I built the room for it first." She looked at him across the chair between them. The single light overhead. The city barely visible through the dark windows. The silence that had a texture now, like a held breath. "If I say yes and I haven't said yes." "I understand." "What are the terms?" He moved then, for the first time. Walked to the small table along the wall that she had not noticed until now, minimalist, like everything he made, and picked up a single sheet of paper. "Everything is written here. Your terms. Mine. What this is. What it isn't. What you can end at any moment with a single word. I want you to read all of it before you decide anything." He held it out. She crossed the room and took it from his hand, and when her fingers touched the paper she noticed that her hands were perfectly steady. This, she thought, was perhaps the most honest thing about her. Chapter 5. The Agreement. She read it twice. The document was brief. 2 pages, handwritten in the precise architectural script she had seen in the margins of blueprints he had shown her, a hand that was controlled without being rigid, deliberate without being cold. He had not had a lawyer write it. This was personal, which was its own kind of statement. The first page established context. This was a consensual, structured experience between 2 adults. It outlined what it was, an exchange of control, temporary and bounded, and what it was not, coercion, performance, or obligation. He was explicit that her participation was a gift, not a debt. He was explicit that his role required her trust to function, and that trust was something he was asking for, not assuming. The second page was specifics. The word she could say at any moment to stop everything, copper. She noticed he had chosen a word that meant something to her, specifically the metal of her grandmother's jewelry, the shade of her family's legacy, and that this choice told her he had thought about her comfort in a way that was unhurried and exact. There was a line near the bottom that she read 3 times. In this room, you carry nothing. That is the only rule that matters. Everything else is architecture. She set the paper on the small table and looked at him. The word is copper. The word is copper. And if I say it, everything stops. Immediately. No explanation required. No conversation unless you want one. I bring you a glass of water, and we are 2 people in a gallery having a quiet evening, and nothing between us changes. You sound very certain of that last part. I am certain of it. Are you? She considered this. The question beneath the question was whether she trusted him, not in the abstract, relational way she had been accumulating evidence of over 9 months, but in the immediate, physical way. In the way that required her body to agree with her mind. Her body, she noticed, was very calm. Yes, I'm certain. He nodded. Not with relief. She had not been worried he would perform relief, but with the quiet precision of a man completing a calculation that had come out correctly. Then I need you to do one thing before we begin. What? Stop making decisions. She almost laughed. Not from dismissal, from recognition. It was the thing she did not know how to stop doing. The machine of her mind, always assessing, always forecasting, always preparing the next 3 moves, had been running continuously for so long that she had ceased to experience it as effort. It was just weather. The climate of her life. I don't know if I know how to do that. That's what I'm here for. He walked to the small table again and picked up the object there she had not fully registered, a square of silk, deep charcoal, folded with the precision of someone who folded things the way they built things, each crease intentional. He walked to her, stopped within arm's reach. Close enough that she could smell him properly now. Cedar, yes, and something warm beneath it, worn and real. May I? 2 words. The question so simple, so complete, that she felt it rearrange something in her chest. Yes. Chapter 6. The silk. His hands were steady. She noticed this first because her own awareness had become suddenly, acutely specific, the individual sensory details she usually processed in aggregate now arriving one at a time, each one complete in itself. The silk was cool against her eyelashes. She felt the slight pressure of it, not tight, never tight, the exact weight of intention, and then the world went dark in a way that was not frightening, but was immediate and total. The gallery disappeared. The chair disappeared. The city beyond the windows disappeared. What remained was sound. The particular silence of a room that is not quite silent, the almost inaudible hum of climate control, the faint settle of the old building around them, the sound of her own breathing, which had become, she noticed with something close to wonder, the loudest thing in the room. And then his voice. Low. Even. The kind of voice that did not need volume because it was confident in being received. Breathe. She breathed. It was not a small thing. In the boardroom, she breathed strategically, timed to pauses in conversation, controlled to convey composure. Here, with no one to read her and no outcome to manage, her breath was simply breath. She felt it move through her whole body in a way that was almost unfamiliar. As though her lungs had been held at partial capacity for so long that full use of them was something she had to relearn. Again. She breathed again. And again. He did not rush her. He did not fill the silence with instruction until her breathing had shifted, until she had settled, perceptibly, into something slower and more honest. Then and only then did she hear him move. His footsteps were measured on the pine floor. She could track him by sound, the distance between them, the direction of his approach. He stopped behind her. She felt his presence the way you feel a change in the thermal quality of a room. His hand touched her shoulder. Just his hand, open, warm through the fabric of her dress. Still. This is the weight of nothing. Feel it. She understood what he meant. His hand was weight, actual, physical, but it required nothing of her. She did not need to respond to it, interpret it, prepare a reply. She only needed to feel it, which was, she realized, something she almost never gave herself permission to do. Feel things without deciding what to do about them. The copper necklace at her throat caught some minute shift in temperature, and she felt the hammered metal against her collarbone cool and specific, her grandmother's weight, her mother's inheritance, the specific material of the women who had made her. Elias's voice came from behind her left shoulder. Walk with me. I'm going to guide you to the chair. All right. No, all right. You don't decide when things are all right. That's mine tonight. Your only job is to let me move you. A long pause, in which she processed the full meaning of what he had said. The surrender in it. Not of her will, that was always hers, but of the management of it. The exhausting, perpetual management of every outcome. She released something in her shoulders she had not known she was holding. His hand moved from her shoulder to the center of her back, firm and certain, and he began to walk her forward, and she went. Chapter 7. Sit. Stay. Breathe. The chair received her perfectly. This was the first thing she registered when the backs of her knees found the edge of the seat, and she lowered herself, and the walnut held her, not just structurally, but dimensionally. The proportions were exact. She had a very particular body, built tall with the broad shoulders of a woman who had carried professional weight since her 20s, and the chair had been made for her proportions with an attention that could only be described as intimate. He had measured her, she realized. Not with a tape measure. With his eyes, over 9 months of dinners and doorways, and the geometry of watching someone move through the world. He had built this chair the way you build for a specific site, not a general structure, but a precise response to this ground, this light, this load. The realization moved through her like something she had no word for. Sit. She was already sitting, but the word did something different to the sitting. Made it deliberate. Made it chosen. She pressed the full length of her spine into the straight back of the chair, and felt the wood support as a presence, real and reliable. Stay. She did not move. The command was so simple. 3 letters. The kind of word you said to a dog and she knew, would have known, before tonight, that knowing this should have stung. It didn't sting. In the specific darkness of the silk blindfold, with the cool air of the gallery on her bare arms and the solidity of the chair beneath her, the word stay was the most restful word she had ever heard. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to do anything. You only have to stay. Breathe. She breathed. Slower this time. She heard her own heartbeat, not racing, not anxious, but present and very clear, like a sound that had always been playing beneath the noise of her life and was now, in this stillness, finally audible. She heard him pick up something from the small table. Something metal, from the sound of it, not clinking, not sharp, but a small clean weight shifting in his palm. Then she felt it. Cold metal against the back of her neck. The flat edge of something small, placed with precision, and then a slow deliberate trace, descending her spine, following the valley between her shoulder blades, pressing just slightly into the fabric of her dress with a weight and temperature that made every nerve in her back articulate itself. She did not move. This surprised her. The old Naomi, the boardroom Naomi, the woman who managed every variable, would have turned, would have needed to see, would have categorized and cataloged the sensation before allowing herself to feel it. This Naomi sat absolutely still and simply felt. The cool metal. The warmth of her own skin rising to meet it. The architecture of her own spine, which she almost never thought of as beautiful and which now, traced by his hand like a blueprint, felt like the most important structural element in the room. His voice arrived at her left ear. You're thinking. I'm always thinking. Not in here. What does the metal feel like? A pause. She had to search for the language for pure sensation, which she rarely used. Like a question being asked in a different language. A silence in which she could feel him considering this. Good. Stay in that language. The metal traced back up. Slowly. With the care of a man who was reading something in the terrain of her, learning the way her muscles held and released under attention. When it reached the nape of her neck again it lifted away, and she felt the absence of it as acutely as she had felt its presence. The leather restraints came next. She heard the small brass hardware. Felt the cognac leather settle against her left wrist, then her right, not tight, never tight, just present. The feeling of being held in place by something that was not force, but was certainly intention. She was still. The stillness was the most extraordinary thing. Not the restraints, not the blindfold, not even the quality of his voice in the quiet room, but the stillness she was capable of, which she had never once offered herself. Which she had not known she was capable of. She felt tears gather at the edges of the silk. Not from pain, not from fear. From something she did not have a professional word for. The specific relief of being held in place by someone who had thought carefully about what holding you required. There you are. His voice was very quiet. I see you, Naomi. Stay right there. She stayed. Part 3, the reveal. The most critical phase of any build is not the laying of the foundation, nor the raising of the walls. It is the moment the structure breathes. The moment it becomes, finally, what it was always designed to be. Chapter 8. The copper mark. Time moved differently in here. She could not have said how long she had been in the chair. It did not seem to matter in the way it always mattered. She had built her entire professional life on time, the 15-minute increment, the scheduled call, the deadline as the organizing principle of reality. Here, time was a medium rather than a constraint. She was in it rather than managing it. She heard him moving around the room. Not aimlessly, there was purpose and direction in the sound of his footsteps, the way you could hear a person thinking in the quality of their movement. She heard him stop at the table again. When he came back to her, she felt his warmth before his touch, close behind her, leaning slightly toward her right side. And then she felt the necklace. Her mother's necklace. The hammered copper discs. He had not removed it. He was working with it in place, lifting the pendants one at a time, and she felt each disc as a separate temperature, a separate weight, as he drew them gently away from her collarbone and then let them fall back. Not randomly. He was tracing a pattern. Reading the architecture of the piece the way he would read a site, learning its topography before he made anything of it. Tell me about this necklace. His voice was close. The question was not intrusive, it was an invitation for her to be present in her own history. It was my mother's. Before that, my grandmother's. Lee made it herself. She was a metalworker before she was anything else. She worked with her hands. She built things. So do you. She felt him lift the longest disc, the center pendant, which was the oldest piece of the necklace, shaped like an elongated leaf with the hammer marks still visible on its face, and trace it slowly from the hollow of her throat out to the edge of her shoulder, following the collarbone as precisely as a surveyor's level. The copper was body warm now. It was her temperature, her metal, her lineage, moved through his hand. Something broke loose in her chest. Quietly, without drama. The way a dam releases pressure before it opens, not a burst, but a settling, a realignment of internal structure. Elias. I'm here. I don't know what to do with this. I know. That's the point. You don't have to know. You only have to feel it. She had been told to feel things before. By therapists, by well-meaning friends, by motivational content she scrolled past at midnight when the loneliness got specific. No one had ever built her a room for it. No one had ever constructed, out of walnut and copper and silk and 9 months of quiet attention, a container precise enough to hold the fullness of her. She felt the copper disc set back against her skin. His hand moved to her shoulder, the full warm weight of his palm, and stayed. You're extraordinary. You know that. People say that about my deals. I'm not talking about your deals. I'm talking about you. What it takes to come into a room like this. What it takes to trust the way you're trusting right now. Most people cannot. They come to the edge and step back. You sat down in the chair. She breathed. The tears were no longer at the edges of the silk, they were tracing small warm lines down her face, and she did not try to stop them. She did not try to manage this. She stayed. Nobody sees me this way. I know. I've been looking for a long time. Chapter 9. After the silk. He removed the blindfold slowly. Edges first, a gradual introduction of light. She blinked. The gallery reassembled itself around her, the pine floor, the brick walls, the single overhead light, the chair she was sitting in with her wrists in their soft leather brackets and her copper necklace lying warm against her chest. He was crouched in front of her. Eye level. Which was itself a choice. He had made himself small in the space before her, not as deference but as presence. As if to say, here I am. Look at me the same way I've been looking at you. She looked at him. He was more beautiful to her now than he had ever been, which had nothing to do with his face and everything to do with the quality of what had just passed between them. You could not see a person like this, attentive and patient and precise and quietly, steadily in charge, and come back out the other side with a less vivid understanding of them. She saw him very clearly. The lines at his eyes, earned from squinting at blueprints in bad light. The stillness in his hands, which rested on his knees without fidgeting. The way he was looking at her. The way he was looking at her was the most intimate thing she had ever experienced. How do you feel? She considered the question with the full intelligence she usually directed at quarterly projections. Like a building whose scaffolding just came down. He did something then that she would think about for a long time afterward. He laughed. A real laugh, brief and warm and entirely unguarded, and the sound of it in the still gallery was the most human thing she had heard all week. That's the best possible answer. I have a lot of questions. I know. They'll keep. That's not usually how I operate. I know that too. Tonight, we let the building breathe before we talk about the next phase. He released the leather restraints, the small brass fittings, each one with a precision that was the opposite of haste. She felt the absence of them as a kind of surprise, as if she had expected them to be permanent. He stood and offered his hand, and she took it and stood, and for a brief moment she was in the fullness of her height, and the fullness of his proximity, and the fullness of what had occurred between them in this room, and none of it was complicated. That was the strangest part. She had been afraid that it would be complicated, that the layers of meaning would tangle, that the professional woman in her would start writing risk assessments before the warmth of his hand had cooled. It was not complicated. It was, in fact, the least complicated she had felt in years. I'm going to need that glass of water now. Already poured. Of course it was. Chapter 10. What architects know about weight. They sat on the floor, which had been his idea, and which she had accepted without negotiating. The water was still cold. He had brought crackers and cheese from somewhere, a small, practical thing that felt more intimate than the evening ceremony, because it was ordinary. Because it said, I thought about what you would need after. She ate. She drank. She did not speak immediately, and he did not press her. Outside the gallery windows, Atlanta continued. The city had no knowledge of what had happened in this room, which was appropriate. Some things required privacy not because they were shameful but because they were sacred. How long have you been wanting to ask me that question? Since the second month. The second month. You waited 7 months. A structure requires proper foundation before it receives load. You weren't ready in month 2. I wasn't sure I was either. What changed? He was quiet for a moment. She watched him organize his answer with the precision he gave everything. You laughed in October. At dinner. At the thing I said about the Buckhead Commission client who wanted a house where nothing needed deciding. You laughed at that, and then you got very quiet, and I could see you understanding something about yourself. I've been working toward tonight since then. She remembered that dinner. She remembered the way the recognition had moved through her, the surgeon who wanted a room where nothing needed deciding. The man who built such rooms. The woman across from him who, for the first time in longer than she could measure, had understood without words that she was in the presence of someone who had studied the specific architecture of her exhaustion. I didn't think you noticed that. I notice everything about you. That's not surveillance, that's interest. There's a difference. I know the difference. Yes, that's why you're here. She was quiet, working through something. He waited. I'm going to want to control this. Going forward. I should tell you that preemptively. I know. I'm going to want to set terms and review outcomes and probably create a framework. I know that too. And you're going to let me do that in the parts of this that exist outside the room, and then inside the room. Inside the room, I'm the architect. You're the building. The metaphor landed in her chest and stayed there. She turned it over. Most men would find that metaphor uncomfortable. Calling a woman a building. I design buildings with reverence. I study their load paths, their beautiful lines, the extraordinary engineering it takes to make them stand. To call you a building is not a reduction. It's the highest compliment I know. She looked at him across the wedge of cheese and the water glasses and the pine floor of the Whitmore Gallery with the city humming outside and the chair in the center of the room behind them, solid and present and already irreversibly part of her history. I'll want to talk about next. Time. I'd expect nothing less. But not tonight. No. Tonight, the building breathes. Part 4, the structure. The most honest thing about a building is what it reveals when the lights go down. The shape it makes against the sky. The way it holds what's inside it. Against everything the outside world can do. Chapter 11. The Woman at Rest. Saturday morning arrived to Naomi Branch in pieces. First, the light, low and amber through linen curtains she had chosen for exactly this quality of filtration. Second, the particular quiet of her bedroom, which was the quietest room in her life and which she had designed. She could see this clearly now, with the same principles Elias used. Minimalism not as aesthetic but as relief. Nothing that demanded her attention. Third, the absence of her phone, which she had deliberately left in the kitchen, which she almost never did. She lay still, flat on her back with her hands at her sides and the ceiling above her and the full unhurried awareness of her own body, which she treated as a vehicle on weekdays and a project on weekends, and had rarely, she now understood, simply inhabited. She felt different. Not transformed, she was suspicious of transformation as a concept, its implication of crisis resolved. More like calibrated. Like a system that had been running with a slight persistent error and had been, carefully and precisely, corrected. She thought about the chair. The silk. The copper disc tracing the path of her collarbone. She thought about his voice. Sit. Stay. Breathe. She thought about the tears that had come without her permission, and the fact that she had not tried to stop them, and how the not stopping had felt like something she had been working toward for a very long time without knowing it. Her phone, when she finally retrieved it at 9:15, held 14 messages. 3 from Joe. 1 from Rachel, her assistant, with a question she labeled non-urgent, just checking. 2 from her attorney John. 1 from her brother Ross, which was a meme about Atlanta traffic because Ross communicated primarily through memes and she loved him for it. 1 from Elias. She read Elias's message last, which was a discipline she had not needed to think about. It was how you read the thing that mattered. Good morning. I hope the building slept well. No decisions required today. She held the phone against her chest for a moment and smiled at her own ceiling. Then she called Joe. Every detail. Start from the parking lot. There's no parking lot at the Whitmore, Joe. You know what I mean. How is he? What happened? Are you okay? You sound different. I'm fine. See, that's the thing. Fine from you on a regular day is one thing. Fine from you the morning after whatever that was sounds like a different word entirely. You sound. Naomi, you sound rested. A pause. She looked out the kitchen window at the Saturday morning light in the maple tree in her courtyard. I am actually. I really am. Chapter 12. The terms she set. She met with Elias the following Tuesday for dinner at the restaurant they had used before. Not a romantic establishment, deliberately. They had always met in places that could be professional if they needed to be. And she came with a notebook and 3 questions she had written out because she was Naomi Branch, and she organized the things that mattered. He arrived first, which surprised her. He was usually exactly on time. He was early. You're going to ask me your questions in order. You can see the notebook. I assumed the notebook. What I'm less sure of is whether you'll let yourself go off script when the conversation takes you somewhere you hadn't planned. She sat across from him and put the notebook open on the table between them and did not close it. Question 1. What do you want from this? Not in that room. In general. From whatever this is between us. He looked at her steadily. You. In whatever form you're willing to give. I want to know you better each month than I did the month before. I want to be the person who holds the weight you can't put down anywhere else. I want to eat dinner with you on Tuesdays and argue about design theory and watch you dismantle William Hicks in boardrooms and then, when the professional world has had its due, be the room you come to when it hasn't. That's what I want. She wrote nothing in the notebook. The pen was still. Question 2. What happens if I say copper when it's not in that room? Same thing. I stop. I make room. I adjust. And if I need more time, if I'm not ready for another evening like that for weeks, then we have dinner and argue about design theory. Nothing is on a schedule except what we decide together. You make it sound simple. Some things are simple. We make them complicated because we don't trust the simplicity. She looked at the third question. It was the one that had taken her the longest to write. She had rewritten it 4 times, each version getting closer to the true sentence, which was this. What if I fall in love with you? She looked at the question. She looked at him. She closed the notebook. I think I'm done with the questions for tonight. The third one still needs answering. You saw the third one? I saw what the first 2 were building toward. She breathed. A real breath. The kind she had learned, in a gallery with a silk blindfold, to let herself take. What's the answer? The answer is that it's already happened for me. I've been building around it since October. I thought you should know. She did not say anything for a long moment. The restaurant moved around them, plates and conversation and the ordinary warm sounds of people sharing meals. She sat in the middle of it and felt, beneath the professional composure, the weight of something settling into its correct position. The weight of being known. I'm going to want to set more terms. I know. And build this slowly. Carefully. There's no other way I know how to. Build. She opened the notebook again. Picked up the pen. Crossed out the third question, the what if, and wrote beside it, in the small precise hand she used when she was certain. Already answered. Chapter 13. Second Friday. The second gallery evening happened 3 weeks later, on a Friday night in early September, when Atlanta had finally, reluctantly, let the worst of the summer go. The air outside was what it only managed for a few weeks each year, close to perfect, warm at the edges with a coolness running beneath it that made people slow down on sidewalks and turn their faces upward. She came differently this time. The first time, she had dressed with a quality of preparation that was adjacent to armor. This time she wore simpler things, a dress in deep plum that she genuinely loved and wore for herself, her grandmother's copper necklace, flat shoes because she was going to sit in a chair that had been built for her and the architecture of it did not require heels. Elias had made one change to the gallery. The chair was in the same position, same precise light above it. But he had added on the small table beside him a hand-drawn architectural rendering, framed simply, a floor plan for a space she had never seen, with her name written in his precise hand at the top. For when you're ready to design your own room. This was just a sketch. The final plans are yours. She stood in the gallery doorway and looked at the rendering and felt the full statement of it. He was not building her a cage. He was teaching her the architecture of her own freedom. This is for a real space? If you want it to be. Nothing is decided yet. You hold the pencil. She crossed the room to him. Stood close. Close enough to feel the warmth of him. You're the most extraordinary man I have ever been afraid of. That's progress. Last month I was just unsettling. You were never just unsettling. You were always this. He reached up and settled his palm against her cheek. His thumb traced the angle of her cheekbone, not possessively, but with the attention of a man who builds things to last and has learned that the details are where permanence lives. Are you ready? She considered the question in its fullness. She had been a real estate developer for 15 years. She had been a decision-maker since before she knew what the word meant. She had been the most capable person in most rooms she entered and had carried that capability like a monument and sometimes like a sentence. She was ready to put it down. Right here. In this room. In these hands. Yes. What's your word? Copper. Copper. And you keep it? I keep it. But I don't think I'll need it tonight. His smile was the full version, the one she had only seen a few times, the one he didn't ration. It changed his whole face. It made him look like a man who had built the thing he meant to build and had stepped back to see it standing. Sit. She sat. The chair received her like it remembered her, which she supposed it did, what had a quality of memory in the grain, in the way it held warmth. She felt the solid back. The precise contours of the seat. The small weight of the leather restraints settling against her wrists before she had time to prepare for them, because preparation was not her role in this room. The silk came next. The world went dark. Her breathing changed. And in the quiet, with the gallery enormous around her and his presence close and the copper at her throat and her grandmother's hands somehow in the metal and her mother's laugh somewhere in the dark behind her eyes, Naomi Branch, developer, fixer. The woman who signed the checks and moved on day 4 and held entire rooms accountable to the quality of her expectations, set down her authority like a coat she had been wearing too long. She breathed. She stayed. She was, in the most exact sense of the word, free. Epilogue, the open floor plan. 6 months later, there was a room. Not in the gallery. The gallery remained the gallery, Whitmore's by appointment on special evenings, the chair still at its center, the rendering still framed on the small table. But in Naomi's house, on the second floor off the landing she had always used as overflow storage, there was now a room that Elias had designed and she had approved, and together they had built in the way they built most things, slowly. With great attention to the foundation, with the understanding that the structure would reveal what it was as they went. The walls were the color of old walnut. The single window faced east. There was a chair, not the gallery chair, a different one, made for this space, lighter in the wood and softer in the leather, and a table, and a framed blueprint of a building she recognized as the first one she had ever developed, which Elias had found in the city's planning archive and rendered in pencil and given her because he believed that the beginning of a thing was worth honoring. There were no cameras. No phone signal she kept in there. No decisions outstanding. It was the room Elias had sketched on the evening of the second Friday, the floor plan with her name at the top. She had looked at it for 3 weeks before asking him to build it. She had spent those 3 weeks arguing with herself about whether a woman of her position and discipline and self-sufficiency needed such a thing. She had decided the question was wrong. The right question was not whether she needed it. The right question was whether she deserved it. And the answer to that, the answer she had arrived at on a Wednesday morning, sitting in her car in the parking garage of her own building, looking at her own hands, was yes. She deserved a room where nothing was required of her. She deserved a man who had built it. Joe came for brunch on the Sunday the room was finished. She walked through the whole house the way she always did, comfortable and curious and constitutionally unable to be anywhere without understanding the space, and eventually arrived at the second floor landing and the new door. What's this? A room. New room? You broke through that storage space? Elias designed it. Joe went quiet in the specific way she went quiet when she was processing something larger than she had anticipated. She looked at the door, the walnut-stained wood of it, the simple brass handle, and then at Naomi. Can I see it? No. Why not? Because it's mine. Joe was silent for a moment. And then she smiled, the wide, real, unguarded smile she had been sharing with Naomi since they were 22 and broke and convinced they were building something. Good. I'm glad something finally is. The morning after the room was completed, Naomi received an email from Elias. Subject line, Blueprint Reference 001. Inside was a single image, the architectural drawing of the room, final version, signed in pencil at the bottom corner the way he signed all his work. And below his name, added in the same precise hand. For N, who had the courage to design the thing she needed most. The best buildings are always the ones built for love. She printed it. Framed it herself, in the simple brass frame she had chosen at the hardware store on a Saturday morning in the particular freedom of a woman who had learned to take her time. She hung it inside the room, where it would stay. End. The Gilded Cage. Hood Eloquence, where the streets meet the literature.